Ladies and gentlemen, let me be very, very clear. If the Democratic Party becomes the likes of Zoran Mamdani, who, by the way, I like, I'm not trying to throw any shade on him or anything like that, but if the Democratic Party becomes him, you have no chance. You have no chance on a national basis in terms of the presidency. In Senate seats in the House, you have no chance. You have no chance. I want to be very, very clear about that. You might have a Democratic Socialist sprinkled here and there, but that ain't what America is.
Stephen A. Smith is suddenly pushing back against the woke wing of the left, and that caught a lot of people off guard. It's not something you see from him very often, which makes this moment especially surprising.
America's about capitalism. America's about dollars and cents. America's about an economy, a flourishing economy. Okay? And you know what it's not about? Free stuff. Somebody got said, so I'm going to say it. Somebody got said, so I'm going to...
For years, Stephen A. has been known as a commentator who generally aligns with Democratic ideas. He's frequently defended liberal policies and has never been shy about criticizing Republicans. That's why this shift stands out. Hearing him challenge his own side raises eyebrows. So what exactly did Stephen A. say this time? Let's take a closer look.
That's how bad the Democrats up. Trump is cool now. He's not just the most powerful guy in the world and just made himself like the richest. He's actually kind of at 78.
Yes.
I mean, rappers like him. The athletes are doing, I was making fun of him jerking off two guys at one time. And now he owns it, and they're doing it.
Here's the deal. The man was impeached twice. He was convicted on 34 felony counts. And the American people still said, he's closer to normal than what we see.
Exactly.
Left. That's what they're saying. He's closer to normal. Why? Because something that pertains, when you talk about the transgender community, for example, and you're talking about the issues that pertain to less than 1% of the population, the Democratic Party came across as if that was a priority more so than the other.
According to Stephen A. Smith, Democratic leadership has narrowed its focus to appeal to a very small segment of the population, while Donald Trump concentrated on issues that impact the majority of Americans. When you look back at the last couple of years under the Biden administration, many headlines revolved around cultural debates, identity issues, and social controversies. Meanwhile, Trump stayed centered on topics like border enforcement, public safety, the economy, and America's role on the global stage. Stephen A. argues these are the issues most Americans care about day to day. He suggests this contrast exposes a growing gap between what Democratic leaders emphasize and what everyday voters are actually worried about, prompting an uncomfortable question about who political leaders are prioritizing.
And so he comes into office. Now you're talking about childbirth, citizenship, and what have you. He knows that's not going to pass the mustard, but he knows that he made that promise. So when he shows up week one on Capitol Hill and he says, this is what we're going to do through an executive order, even though it's going to be shot down through the courts and what have you, he's saying, I kept my promise. A lot of other things that he's going to point to that he's going to try to do, I kept my promise. Then you turn around and you look at the left and you say, what promises did you keep? Now you might know the answer to that. I'm certainly not questioning your knowledge about that at all. What I'm saying is what resonated with the voter. What voter out there can look at the Democratic Party at this moment in time and say there's a voice for...
Stephen A. points out that only a small portion of Americans truly feel represented by the Democratic Party right now. For many others, that sense of connection has faded. In recent years, party leadership appeared to concentrate on a narrow set of priorities, leaving broader concerns unaddressed. The strategy seemed clear: energize a passionate base and hope that momentum would carry them to victory. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Rather than expanding support, it left many voters feeling sidelined. What was meant to be a winning formula ended up highlighting how disconnected the party had become from the majority of Americans.
Somebody that speaks for us, that goes up on Capitol Hill and fights the fights that we want them fighting on our behalf. They didn't do that. And that's why their behinds are home, and that man is back into the White House, and they want to sit up there and talk. You look at the networks right now, they're talking about him. Look at it, this is the latest, look at him. Here he goes again. Well, you know what here he goes again means? He's doing what he said he was going to do. He promised you he was going to do these things, and he walked into office week one, and that's exactly what he's doing. And he's saying, y'all do something about it. And when you try to do something about it, he's going to say, look at them now. Now they're concerned about these issues. Were they talking about that during the campaign? Hell no. That's really it.
In contrast, Stephen A. argues that Trump entered office with straightforward goals: improving the economy, strengthening border security, restoring America's global influence, and putting everyday Americans first. In his view, Trump has stayed focused on those objectives. While many politicians get caught up in internal party battles or symbolic gestures, Trump's messaging remains centered on issues people feel in their daily lives, such as inflation, jobs, national security, and international relations. To many supporters, this consistency made him more than just a politician. It made him someone who appeared to speak directly for regular Americans.
You had Biden. I know that you supported Biden. Obviously, you spoke about his mental acuity and all of that other stuff, but we all saw what we saw. Before the debate on June 27th, when the debate happened, and by the time that was exposed, you then waited 3 weeks after that before he decided to walk away, but it was too late for anybody else to get in. So Kamala Harris, who didn't resonate during the primaries in 2020, couldn't even get to Iowa, suddenly is the Democratic nominee. And then you roll up at the convention in Chicago, and everybody's like, she's a rock star. So it was like, wait a minute, how that happened? I don't know how.
Stephen A. also highlights another factor he believes hurt Democrats in the last election: Kamala Harris. Within the party, Harris struggled to build strong national support and had faced setbacks in previous races. Despite this, she was selected as vice president, a decision some critics viewed as driven more by representation goals than broad voter appeal. While the choice carried symbolic importance, Stephen A. suggests it failed to resonate with a large portion of the electorate. He argues this decision reflected a larger pattern of prioritizing image over effectiveness, which ultimately contributed to voter dissatisfaction.
So you're looking at all of those things and you're saying, yes, I voted for her. A lot of people voted for her. But in the end, we end up feeling like damn fools because we supported it. We fell for the okie doke, as they say. You know she did. If you had a primary, the likelihood is that she would not have been the Democratic nominee. And you can't say that about Trump in this side.
That leads to a difficult question for Democrats moving forward. Who among their potential candidates can match Donald Trump's visibility, confidence, and widespread appeal? Some mention figures like Mamdani, but his policy positions may be too far left to connect with most voters. Others point to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, yet her strong alignment with progressive activism could limit her national reach. Even Gavin Newsom, despite his profile, faces criticism over issues in California that could hurt him on a larger stage. Stephen A. suggests the party is struggling to find a candidate who balances relatability, competence, and broad appeal.
Yes, I'm not mad he won
because when I see, especially in the aftermath of the election, some of the things that transpired with the Democratic Party, you know, in an effort to manipulate the election and the vote, it really ticked me off. When you hear people talking about practical things, and then I saw folks on the left basically trying to guilt me into voting for you. It bothered me. I might have ended up voting for Kamala Harris because I didn't like how Trump acts. But what I didn't do was call him a racist. I didn't call him a... I knew Trump before he ran for president.
Yeah.
We talked on the phone. We talk at basketball games or boxing events. I knew this man, and so some of the things that were being said about him, I knew were not true. And I was saying, come on, y'all, you got to do better.
Stephen A. also criticizes what he sees as a coordinated effort by Democratic leaders and sympathetic media outlets to consistently portray Trump in the most negative light possible. Over the years, Trump has been labeled reckless, divisive, or unfit, while his accomplishments are often minimized. Stephen A. notes that people who have worked with Trump frequently describe him differently, as focused, decisive, and attentive to voter concerns. He argues that this contrast between media portrayal and personal accounts raises serious questions about bias and fairness in political coverage.
If the Democratic Party becomes the likes of Zohran Mamdani, who, by the way, I like, not trying to throw any shade on him or anything like that, but if the Democratic Party becomes him, you have no chance. You have no chance. On a national basis in terms of the presidency. In Senate seats in the House, you have no chance. America's about capitalism. America's about dollars and cents. America's about an economy, a flourishing economy. Okay? And you know what it's not about? Free stuff.
Stephen A. warns that if the Democratic Party were to nominate a candidate with strongly socialist policies, it could further distance the party from mainstream voters. Many Americans remain skeptical of sweeping ideological agendas that feel disconnected from their everyday experiences. Recent elections suggest that voters often reject extreme positions, even when they're presented with good intentions. Yet, despite these signals, Democratic leadership continues leaning heavily into progressive rhetoric. Stephen A. believes repeating this approach could lead to another major electoral setback.
America's about capitalism. America's about dollars and cents. America's about an economy, a flourishing economy. Okay? And you know what it's not about? Free stuff. Somebody got to say it, so I'm going to say it. Somebody got to say it, so I'm...
He also emphasizes that many Americans value personal responsibility, hard work, and earning success rather than relying heavily on expansive government programs. That's why pushing candidates associated with socialist-style policies carries significant risk. Historical examples from around the world have made voters cautious about those ideas. Stephen A. argues that if Democrats continue down this path, they aren't just taking a chance. They're potentially undermining their own chances in the 2028 election by backing policies that many Americans fundamentally oppose.
Even Biden, who was a terrible
That's what
president.
I was getting ready to go there, ask you about Biden. Your
Yeah, I
thoughts
don't
about
think
Biden.
he
You had him as
was
your
a
second
wicked
worst.
man.
You had him as your second worst president. Is that correct?
Yeah, and he was lucky he got second because the Civil War is pretty big. But Biden was, and you're going to see over time how bad he actually was. Now, he's going to have an asterisk next to his name. It's going to say, well, he might not have known what he was doing. And that's a medical condition. And that might be an excuse, but boy, he was bad.
Meanwhile, commentators like Bill O'Reilly argue that Joe Biden's presidency created an opening for Republicans by leaving many Americans dissatisfied with the direction of the country. Concerns about the economy, global tensions, and domestic stability contributed to a desire for change. In O'Reilly's view, this environment helped fuel support for Trump's return. Taken together, Stephen A., Smith, O'Reilly, and many voters point to the same conclusion. The Democratic Party's focus on cultural issues and controversial candidates has pushed voters away, while Trump's emphasis on core concerns like security, economic stability, and leadership resonated more strongly. If Democrats don't adjust their approach, they risk repeating the same mistakes. That brings us to the end of today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.